Hey everyone, it's Crystal from Sober Onions podcast. I am here actually by myself. I haven't done an episode by myself in a long time. I have been really excited to have all these great guests on, and I have actually 4 more lined up for you coming up. And so I just want to say first, thank you so much for just being there for me and for giving me the time in your cars or on your runs or in the gym and listening to my journey or to the journey of others and what this whole sober journey is all about. I know that it has opened this whole world to me. It is completely different. I am in a whole different situation now being sober, and I am actually 5 months and 2 weeks. So when I first started this podcast, I was 100 days, and that was my mile marker for me to go ahead and just do this podcast and just hit it hard. And now this is going to be the 12th episode. So I am so excited about that. It's been a really hard for me. I still am struggling. I'm going to be totally honest with you. Coming up on 6 months has been really hard. I feel like I'm hitting a wall a little bit. I feel very overwhelmed with life, with all the new commitments that I have. I went from a life of a job, of kids, of before COVID, of just waking up day to day, doing my thing, doing girls' night outs, doing book clubs, doing wine, doing social events, going to weddings, getting drunk, coming home and having my wine and going to sleep. Just a totally different lifestyle. And now my schedule revolves around my AA meetings. It revolves around my sponsor. I talk to my sponsor every single morning, which I'm super, super blessed that I have a sponsor that has enough time for me to allow me to call her every single morning. I am working through the steps of the AA program, which that program works for me. It's not the only program out there. And that's kind of going to be one of the episodes that I do on this podcast. It will be just all the different methods of being sober, because it doesn't matter how you get sober, whatever works for you. It's just being sober. So with that said, I also had some really great suggestions, but first I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone for listening to my podcast and wherever you're at, and give me the time of day and just encouraging me to continue on, because I do feel vulnerable. I do feel like I'm putting my life out there and I am exposed. I've confessed, everything about my personal life and all the crazy things that I've gone through. And I'm going to share some more stuff with you today, things that I did when I was drunk that I can even remember. I mean, there's so much that I can't even remember. And today we're going to talk about sober lingo, and we're going to talk about what a toolbox is, because we hear about that, and just kind of some of the things that I remember that I did when I was intoxicated that I have just now thought about, because now I'm walking through my journey of sobriety and I am trying to figure out how to balance my mental health with my sobriety, with my past and my present. And like I said, that's with the help of a sponsor. And if you don't have a sponsor, I highly encourage it. It's not the easiest thing in the world. It's another thing to do. And like I said, my life has totally changed and I am feeling a little overwhelmed because, I have to wake up every day and I have homework to do and I have meetings to go to and I have outpatient. And I think I shared with you guys last episode that I went to court and I was so blessed to have the judge take my tickets, and he reduced them and he congratulated me on my sobriety. And it was very emotional for me because I was really just kind of hit in the face that I was really only 5 months sober and that this is all just brand new to me and just how hard it's been. And so with that, continuing, I applied for homeless court, which I didn't even know was a thing. And what that means is that I can apply my rehab that I did and my outpatient program to my ticket. Well, because my tickets were after I went to rehab, I don't qualify. I do qualify for their recovery program, which again, I didn't even know was a thing. So through the state, they have a recovery program. So if you have any cases or any tickets and you're going through all of this, there are resources out there to help you. But what is so crazy about it and what I'm not excited about is the recovery program is at the rehab that I was at when I did my residential. And I was brand new. I was in my first 30 days of sobriety and I felt so powerless there and I hated it. And it was so emotional. I cried every day. I was so depressed because I just couldn't believe that I was in that situation. So Friday, I report back to the rehab, coming back there, 5.5 months sober. And I am doing the recovery program to help with my tickets and do the homeless course. So I will update you on that. That is kind of the newest with me. I am really struggling with it because I have a lot of emotions attached to that rehab, but I think God has a plan. Obviously, this is happening for a reason. And who knows? I mean, it might be really encouraging to the women there to see me walk back in that facility and show them that it does work. I am still here. I am still sober. And I am still saying that it's hard and it's not easy. And especially the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months, I haven't been on the Vivitrol. It was a lot easier on the Vivitrol. I have to admit that. The cravings weren't as bad. And when I got off the Vivitrol, it just hit me like bricks. So that was really difficult. So, and I don't think people talk about this stuff. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts and people talk about, sober life is so great and everything's amazing and I have a better life. And I get it. I'm getting there and my life isn't chaotic anymore, but it's still brand new to me and I miss my kids and it's every day so long. And with not every day that goes by that I don't hear from my kids is so hard. And so I'm just kind of being real with you and saying that, I'm still here, I'm still trucking and I'm doing and I'm using the resources. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how do people stay sober and how do they do it? And so that's what we're going to talk about. And I asked a lot of my friends. And so I am going to share with you what they told me. And we're going to talk about some lingo and some different things because I was brand new and very, very confused. So before I start that, I wanted to share a little story with you someone told me this week. And I absolutely adored this story because I was struggling and I feel this way. And I feel like in my sober walk, a lot of it is mental. And this week, I'm actually going to be doing an Instagram live with Megan from Sober Sisters. We're going to do a little talk about our mental health. It's very, very important. And both of us have two different walks in our journey. She did not go to rehab. She did not go to a detox center. She did it differently, but she still is sober. So we're going to talk about that live on Instagram. So if you're not following me on Instagram, it is sober.onions. All right. So with that, I want to share a little story with you. And I want to kind of share why I am doing this podcast. I am doing this podcast because I feel like, one, it helps me stay accountable. And I love people. And I wish that I had something like this when I first got sober. And I love just the experience of interviewing these people and learning so much about them and who they are and how they got there. And it's just inspiring to me. And a lot of people were way off worse than I ever was, and they remain sober. So it's just totally encouraging. But I think the biggest thing that with alcohol and with drugs or addicts or whatever your vice is, It can be anything. It could be depression. It can be anything. Be fear. It can be eating disorders. It can be mental disorders. It can be drugs. It can be alcohol. For me, it is alcohol and depression. Those are the two things that I've dealt with in my life. But when you go through something like this, talking to another alcoholic, so I'm an alcoholic, I need to talk to another alcoholic, is how I get through. So I was told this story, and it was about this man who fell in this hole. It was a very, very deep hole. It was dark, it was black. He was all alone. He was struggling. And no matter how hard he tried to climb out of this hole. He scratched at the surface, he scratched at the mud. More water was coming in. He was cold, he was lonely. He just could not get out of this hole. And so he was in this hole and he's looking up, and this therapist walks by. And the therapist yells down and says, this is how you do it. These are the things you need to do to get out of this hole. These are the practices and the challenges that you need to do for yourself in order for you to get out of this hole. And so then the therapist walks by. So the man takes the information and he does everything the therapist does, and he still cannot get out of this hole. And so then the pastor walks by, and he looks down in the hole, and the man looks up in the hole, and he says, son, you need to pray. You need to ask God. You need to, really just trust in God and believe in God, and you will get out of this hole. And so the man does, and rightly so. That neither the therapist nor the pastor were wrong. These were both amazing tools to get out of this hole. And so he still cannot get out of this hole. He's using the tools, he's trusting God, he's doing everything he's being told to do. And then another alcoholic walks by, and he looks down in the hole and he says, hey, Joe, you're an alcoholic? And Joe says, yes, I'm an alcoholic. And he says, I'm an alcoholic. Here, take my hand. I'll help you get out of the hole. So he takes his hand, and they both walk by and leave the hole. And the point of the story is that the alcoholic and the alcoholic have something that no one else has. I can't explain to my family who doesn't drink what I'm going through or what it's like. No matter how hard I pray or how much I'm told, it always takes that other person who has been through it before or understands what I'm going through. So you need all those tools. You need the therapist, you need the priest, the pastor, or the higher power, whatever it is that you believe in, to get out of that hole. But you also need the person to grab your hand and help you get out. And so I've had that for me. So hopefully I can be a little bit of that for you. And hopefully that story resonates with you as much as it did for me. With that said, we are going to talk about sober lingo and what that is and what all these terms mean and how everything works, because I have never heard any of this stuff. So I came into the sober lifestyle and I heard all these little sayings, and it was like, oh, a toolbox or foundation or suit up and show up or halt or gift, all these different things. So I'm just going to kind of tell you a little bit about sober lingo. And I think a lot of it has to do with, what that person is going through, and they're just little encouraging words. So someone says, okay, you're going to suit up and show up. Is anything that you need discipline in? It's like, hey, you need to go to a meeting so that you have that accountability. Suit up and show up. A foundation. You want to make sure that you build a strong foundation of your sobriety, which means your toolbox. And people say, well, what is a toolbox? A toolbox is prayers, steps, sponsors, meeting, phone. Okay, so it's 5 things, because I know a lot of people are like, well, what's a toolbox? So let's talk about that, how you use your toolbox. So I talked to a couple of my friends and I asked them, I said, hey, you've been sober a long time. So tell me about your sobriety and what is in your toolbox. So I don't know if you guys heard Anya's podcast. Anya was one of my really good friends. We were waitresses at a little Christian cafe, and we worked so hard. That place was so busy. I can't even tell you how busy it was. But I asked her and I said, what is in your toolbox? And she said her biggest thing was that she had to be honest and open, that she needed to be willing to utilize those tools, which were prayers, doing the steps through her Celebrate Recovery. She has a sponsor, she goes to meetings, and then she calls other alcoholics. Okay, so that's just somebody that is close to me. It seems to be kind of a theme. I asked my friend Bruce here in California, and he said the same thing, calling another alcoholic, asking how they're doing, staying active in whatever program that you're in. For him, it's sponsoring others because that keeps him accountable, and he's had a lot of time in his journey, and just being grateful for what he has and what he has needed over the years, and how going and being with other alcoholics or other addicts for his, for whatever your vice is, it just has really helped out because he wasn't somebody who reached out. And so reaching out and having accountability partners, people that you trust, the biggest thing is trust, because you have to be able to be real and not fake to really get that true emotional support. So I asked my other friend, Jen, what was in her toolbox and how she continued to stay sober. And she said that prayer, first thing in the morning, was huge, that she realizes that she's not God. She's not the higher power. And she said, thank God I'm not my higher power. So those are her tools, was prayer. She prays a lot. A lot of people, kind of had the same thing, talking to another alcoholic, talking to another addict. One of my Instagram friends, she said, playing the tape forward. I did a podcast on that about, how my sponsor told me to play the tape forward. Okay, so you want to drink today? All right, let's just play the tape forward. So you have a drink, but then you have another drink. Then you have another drink, and then the list goes on. And then what happens? DUI, end up in jail, lose a friend, hurt a family member. And so, making all those amends now, I'm realizing how much damage that, I did. It was definitely, I was very, reckless when it came to my alcoholism. I remember a lot of things, that I did that I kind of looking back at, that I'm just like, wow, how did I have what was my reputation? What did people think? I mean, I remember being, at a tennis match and getting into it with a bartender because I didn't think that my drink had enough alcohol on it. I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but once you start drinking and you start paying for drinks, it's like, if you're not tasting it, then you're not paying for it. And all of a sudden it becomes their fault. It's the bartender's fault that, you need a certain amount of alcohol, to get that feeling and to get that taste. And there was times when, my kids, they had, friends over, and the older they got, the alcohol kind of started coming out around me. And I can remember, playing beer pong with a bunch of high schoolers. I mean, what kind of example is that? That's just terrible. And I look back and I'm just like, oh my gosh, but I wouldn't do that now. I would never do that. I would never do that in a conscious mind. I would never be that type of example. But when I'm intoxicated, all rules in my brain go out the door. I mean, there were times where I woke up and I had to ping myself. I had to literally find out where I was. And those times I would say, well, the kids were at their friends that weekend, and I would justify, and that's just a side of pride, and self-justification was why I drank so much, because just like everybody else, oh, I've had a long day, I deserve this glass of wine. Or oh my gosh, I got a promotion, let's celebrate, champagne. There's always this self justification. And even when my my daughter was graduating, I wanted to drink so bad during that graduation, and I had a couple drinks before I left, and nothing major in my mind, because I justified, well, their dad didn't even show up, so it's okay if I am here with a little buzz, because I'm justified that I showed up. So it boggles my mind, the things that alcohol or any substance does to your brain, because it's just embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. And I know I talk to other alcoholics, and it's like, we don't talk about these little tiny things. They just add up. It's like, oh, that one time I did this. Oh, that one time, I did this, and we just don't talk about it, because it's not okay. And it's not something that affects anybody else. It's so private and personal. And that's when the alcoholism or the addiction creeps up on you. And that's what happened to me. It totally creeped up on me. I was in a situation, I think I mentioned this in my first episode, that my ex-husband and I were in an open relationship. It was a very trendy thing at the time to have these open relationships, and I know they still go on. It's not anything I condone, but it really tore us apart. But a big part of it was partying. And for him, he was big into cocaine, and I could not do cocaine. I have a heart problem. I have a mitral valve prolapse. And so for me, it just was not, I couldn't do it. I tried it. I'll tell you right now, I was in the Bahamas and we went on a cruise, and I did it. And all I can remember was I felt like something dripping down the back of my throat, and I started panicking and having a panic attack. And that was it. Like I just couldn't do it anymore. And it was really hard for me, because it was something that he really, really enjoyed, and it was something that he needed in his life. So to keep up with him, I was introduced to Adderall. And Adderall is a drug that is used for people who have ADHD, but it is abused. And I abused it. I used it for a couple of years, and I was so skinny. Oh my gosh, I never ate. I looked so great. Nobody knew. They all just thought that I was working out, and I had the Zumba studio. So I was just looking fabulous, but I couldn't keep up with that dance studio if I wasn't taking the Adderall. And sadly, I was actually getting it from someone I knew in the military. So again, I'm not saying anything about military, or that people in the military do this. I just happened to be the person that I got it from. And when that ran out, I had a friend who was a doctor, and you would go to him and you would pay cash, and he would say you had ADHD, and then I would had a prescription for it. And so when I went through my divorce, because it kind of came crashing down, and there was some domestic violence there, and that's another part of my past that I'll talk about a different time. But the cocaine sort of hit ahead, and it became physical. And when we went through divorce, I kicked Adderall all by myself. And it took I'd say about a week and a half. I really didn't have a choice, because I was still taking the kids to school. I was really heavily involved in PTA. I was doing the fall fundraisers where, we had 2,000 kids in the school, and I was in charge of everything. And so I just was sick. And that's what everybody knew, was that Crystal was sick. And no one knew that I was literally taking Adderall. And so it was the worst. I'll never forget it. And I'll never use drugs or anything again because of it. Fortunately, I was able to rid that disease of myself. And I don't know how anybody goes through drug addiction withdrawal, because that was really, really tough for me. But there's just, I could tell you story after story, because all these things are, coming to, the top of my sobriety journal and journey, because I am writing all these things down. But it's amazing how it is so important to have this toolbox, because these things come up and these things come at me, because even though I have this past and I'm telling you all these things about my past, now what do I do? So for me, yeah, my toolbox is prayer. I have to pray. I have to go to meetings. They center me, even when I don't want to. Like this week, I did not want to go to a meeting, and I had a really bad attitude about it. I was just like, oh, like it's such a hassle, and I'm tired, and I'm making all excuses. And then I went to the meetings, I listened to some stories, and it just got me through that day. And I stayed sober because I went to that meeting. So these are really, really important things that, to think about is what is in your toolbox, and prayer, meetings, sponsor, talking to another alcoholic, a podcast, there's all kinds of resources now. There's all these Instagram influencers, we're encouraging each other to continue on. There's, so much more recognition, I feel like, because before it was so anonymous, and now it's like everyone, it's like, let's be proud. I'm proud I made it 5 months. It's been hard. It's been a hard 5 months. I mean, people that have 20 years, I look at them in awe, especially doing it the older way of doing things, where now we have so much more encouragement, and we have so many more resources, and we have people that we can lean on and we can talk to every day. So with that, I hope you got a little bit out of my experience and my digging into what a toolbox is, what some sober lingo is. There's a one that it says, "Are you a friend of Bill's?" And I was like, huh, who's Bill? But a friend of Bill is somebody who is in the AA program. It's basically saying, instead of saying, hey, are you an alcoholic? I'm an alcoholic. Say like, hey, are you a friend of Bill's? So there's a lot of really cool lingo in there. And if you have any, send it to me. Also, I have some really good giveaways. I have been getting some really great merchandise donated to me, because there's a lot of people out there that are supporting podcasts. And so if you email me at soberonions@aol.com, put your name and your address for a chance to win some free merch. You'll get it mailed straight to your house. And I want to do a shout out to a new sponsor, Jarrod in Florida. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And I do appreciate you. It is so awkward for me to put myself out there with like a PayPal donate button. But the reality is this podcast costs money. You have hosting fees, you have website fees, you have equipment fees. There's a lot that goes into podcasting that I had no clue about. So I love that everyone is being so supportive. And if you want to donate or become a patron, just go to the website soberonions.com, and there is a tab there that says patrons and sponsors, and you just click that little donate. It goes straight to PayPal. I can send you a receipt, and I really appreciate everything. You guys have been so amazing. I'm lost for words sometimes at how incredible this community is. And like I said, keep using your toolbox, reach out. I know for me, it's a little bit easier because I have an outgoing personality, but don't be afraid to reach out and talk to another addict or alcoholic or anybody who's dealing with what you're dealing. And there's so many resources. I'm going to put in the show notes some resources, some ways to get a hold of people if maybe you're a little sober curious and you're like, maybe I should try this out, or if maybe you're just on your journey and you need a little encouragement. So thank you so much again. Hey, if you are my daughters, Sky and Haley, I love you guys. If you're listening to this, who knows, maybe you are. And with that, this is Crystal, Sober Onions. Don't forget, if I can do it, we can do it.